Good morning po. My topic is scope, delimitation, and limitation of study. So let us begin by defining the scope of the study. The scope of the study refers to the parameters under which the study will be operating. The problem you seek to resolve will fit within certain parameters. Think of the scope as the domain of your research. What's in the domain and what is not. You need to make it as clear as possible what you will be studying and what factors are within the acceptable range of the study. For example, if you are studying the ill effect of bullying on middle school children, the scope could include both face-to-face bullying and cyberbullying in grade 6 through grade 8. Next is the limitations and the delimitations of the study. So let's first define the limitations. So the limitations are matters and occurrences that arise in a study which are out of the researcher's control. They limit the extensity to which a study can go and sometimes affect the end result and conclusion that can be drawn. Each study, no matter how well is constructed and conducted, has limitations. This is one of the reasons why we do not use the words prove and disprove with respect to research findings. It is always possible that future research may cast doubt on the validity of any hypothesis or conclusion from a study. Your study might have access to only certain people in an organization, certain documents, and certain data. These are limitations. Subsequent studies may overcome these limitations. While on the other hand is the delimitations. The delimitations of the study are those characteristics that arise from limitations in the scope of the study or the defining the boundaries, and by conscious exclusionary and inclusionary decisions made during the development of the study plan. Unlike limitations, which flow from implicit characteristic of method and design, the limitations result from specific choices by the researchers. Among these are the choice of objectives and questions, variables of interest, the choice of theoretical perspective that were adopted, the paradigm which can be qualitative, quantitative, or mixed, the methodology, the theoretical framework, and the choice of participants. The first delimiting step is the choice of problem, implying that there were other related problems that could have been chosen but were rejected or screened off from view. To elucidate the delimitations of your study, review each decision you had to make in putting together your study. In your purpose statement, you declare what your study intends to accomplish. In the delimitation section, you can repeat this declaration along with a pronouncement of what the study does not intend to cover. In the latter case, your decision for excluding certain pursuits are likely based on such criteria as not directly relevant to problematic because not feasible and the like. Make this reasoning as explicit as possible. In other words, limitations are what the researchers cannot do or the elements outside of their control, and the limitations are what the researchers will not do or the elements outside of the boundaries they have set. Both are important because they help to put the research finding into context, and although they explain how the study is limited, they increase the credibility and validity of a research project. Guidelines on how to write a scope. A good scope statement will answer the following 6 questions. Why, what, where, when, who, and how. For why? It is the general aims and objectives or the purpose of the research. What? The subject to be investigated and the included variable. For where? The locations or setting of the study. An example, where the data will be gathered and to which entity the data will belong. For when? The time frame within which the data will be collected. For who? The subject matter of the study and the population from which they will be selected. These populations need to be large enough to be able to make generalization. And for how the research is to be conducted, including a description of the research design, whether it's an experimental research, a qualitative research, or a case study, methodology, research tools, and analysis technique. To make things as clear as possible, you should also state why specific variables were omitted from the research scope and whether this was because it was a delimitation or a limitation. You should also explain why they could not be overcome with standard research method backed up by scientific evidence. How to start writing your study scope? Use the below prompts as an effective way to start writing your scope. First one is, this study is to focus on. Another, this study covers the. And the last one is, this study aims to. Now, the guidelines on how to write delimitations. Since the delimitation parameters are within the researcher's control, readers need to know why they were set, what alternative options were available, and why these alternatives were rejected. For example, if you are collecting data that can be delivered from 3 different but similar experiments, the readers needs to understand how and why you decided to select the one you have. Your reason should always be linked back to your research question, as all delimitations should result from trying to make your study more relevant to your scope. Therefore, the scope and delimitations are usually considered together when writing a paper. So, how to start writing your study delimitations? Use the below prompts as an effective way to start writing your study delimitations. First, this study does not cover. Another one, this study is limited to. And the last one, the following has been excluded from this study. Next is the example of delimitation in research. Examples of delimitations includes research objective, research question, research variable, target populations, and statistical analysis technique. The last one is the example of limitations in research. Example of limitations includes issues with sample and selections, insufficient sample size, population traits or specific participants for statistical significance, lack of previous research studies on the topic which has allowed by further analysis, limitations in the technology, instruments used to collect your data, and limited financial resources and or funding constraints. That's the end for the scope, delimitation, and limitation of the study. Thank you.